were able to connect with some people, grab some contacts, know that you're going to go beyond this day and find that support and empowerment. I know I will. So we're going to continue with our speakers before lunch. So everybody gather around back to the middle. Everyone come back around so you can watch. I would like to introduce Dr. Tiffany Tajiri, a licensed board-certified clinical psychologist, veteran U.S. Air Force officer, and special operations trained psychologist that has taken part in the selection and assessment of Special Forces personnel. She created Rhythm Restoration, an innovative faith-based method that uses visualization and bilateral stimulation to help those who have endured psychologically painful life experiences. Dr. Tajiri is the author of Peace After Combat, Healing the Spiritual and Psychological Wounds of War, a book about recovery and restoration for military veterans and their families. She co-wrote and implemented Abundant Recovery Ministry, a Christ-centered recovery program. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Linda. You got all those psychobabble words on point, and my last name. All right, so today's talk is going to serve as an appetizer sampler about how incredible your mind is. So I want to take you through an experiential exercise, and it's going to require visualization. So if you feel comfortable, please just close your eyes. If you don't, find somewhere to focus your gaze. I want you to imagine that your mentor is walking into your office and takes a seat. You cannot read the expression on their face, and for the next 20 seconds, conclude that story in your mind's eye. Take a deep breath in and come back to the present moment. We're going to revisit that thought at the end of my talk. You can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without oxygen, but you cannot go 3 seconds without thought. Did you know that your mind has as much energy in one day as all the cell phones combined in the entire world? Wow is right. So that incredible mind, every single thought that you have in your mind impacts every single cell in your body, and you have well over 50 trillion cells. How? How does that work? Well, your mind controls your brain, and your brain controls your heart, and your heart controls the growth medium of every single one of those cells. What is the growth medium? It is your blood. So your thoughts impact your cells to the very basic level. So I can't tell you how important that is to hold your thoughts captive to goodness, to joy, peace, and harmony. You have 80 billion neurons, those are brain cells, in your brain, and each one of those neurons is capable of making over 1,000 connections. 80 billion is like the number of stars in the night galaxy. And you're choosing what connections it makes, over 1,000 connections. So what is the constellation in your own mind? Now, there is a difference between the mind versus the brain. Your mind is the intellectual part of you, the intelligent part of you with your personality, and the brain is simply the globular goop, the meat, and your mind determines what connections your brain is going to be making. So I want to give you an example of how that works and how the mind and the brain function so differently. Since we're working with veterans, let's talk about a phenomenon known as phantom limb or phantom pain. Some of our vets come back from deployment without an arm or leg from whatever they may have endured in combat, okay? And so what happens is they're feeling the sense of pain in the arm that's not there in the phantom limb. That's why it's called phantom, because it doesn't exist. And everybody's like, what are we going to do about this? The mind knows very well that the limb is gone, but the brain doesn't. The software in the brain has not yet connected that. Think of the mind as the software and the brain as like a computer. It directs where it goes. So what do? How do we treat that? There's a form of therapy known as mirror therapy, okay? So you take a mirror and you put it down the symmetry of your body, down the middle of the axis. And let's say I lost my left arm. So I would look in the mirror and would move my right hand and I would see it in a fluid movement, right? And when I release it and let it go, my head goes, oh, because I'm seeing the reflection and it's completing my body. The left arm is absolutely okay. What I'm doing is using my mind to trick my brain, and that releases the pain. Isn't that incredible about how the mind is? I want to talk to you about just how incredible our imagination is. Dr. Kelly Cole had done research, and she proved that imagining doing exercises can actually get you muscular strength gain. How is that possible? Well, she had a cohort, one that was imagining doing the exercise, one that actually did them in a cohort that did nothing at all for a baseline. And in the end, those individuals that imagined doing the exercise had 22% muscular strength gain, 30% for the group that actually did it. Why? Because the motor neurons in the brain, the motor neurons in the somatosensory cortex were wiring and firing together. And we know that neurons that fire together wire together. Now, there is a famous Russian activist by the name of Natan Sharansky, and he was imprisoned in a sensory deprivation prison for 13 years. An intelligent man, and he knew that he was going to go crazy. He would possibly die because his brain would not be stimulated. So what did he do? He played mental chess in his head. Over and over, he was his opponent, and then he was playing on both ends. It's like the Queen's Gambit on steroids. You've seen that on Netflix. Fantastic, right? And so when he got out of prison, he ended up beating the world champion. In 1954, Roger Bannister did something all the physicians said could not be done. He ran the mile in under 4 minutes. Now, everyone said it had to be under perfect, pristine conditions. The track had to be just so. You had to be in just the right shape. And the weather, and the sun, and the stars, and the moon had to be aligned. But he proved otherwise. The guy was in the middle of medical school, for goodness gracious. I sure was not in shape in the middle of graduate school. That is for certain. And he did it because he believed he could. I think the most phenomenal thing that happened after that was this. About 3 to 4 weeks later, multiple people started running the mile in under 4 minutes. Why is that? Because their mind knew it was now possible. We were not setting mental boundaries on ourselves, okay? So as a doctor and a clinical psychologist, I have learned one big thing, that the brain is always on a search for wholeness. Think of the phantom limb that I was talking about, right? We were using a mirror to create what? To create wholeness. There are phenomena known as the Zeigarnik effect, as well as Gestalt theory and therapy of psychology. And it is the search for wholeness, and wholeness brings completion. And to me, that's a very intimate spiritual connection that we have as human beings. And so when I study trauma, my goal is to bring wholeness to the mind, right? Because the mind projects the image to the wiring of the neural networks in the brain. So what is the hallmark trait of PTSD? It's avoidance. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk about it. But you know what? Your brain has to digest a traumatic experience the way your gut needs to digest food. I want you to imagine taking on a huge Italian meal and never being able to digest it. Can you imagine how sick you would feel? In that same way, your brain needs to digest emotional experiences. How do we do that? Is it complicated? No, we have to confront it first. So everything that is post-traumatic stress is stored in the amygdala, which is the fear center of your brain. What do we gotta do? We gotta confront it. We gotta pull it out. So we take it to the frontal lobe, the unique part of our brain that solves all kinds of problems. It makes us different than any other primate. And when we bring it to the frontal lobe, we do something special. We do a process, one or two things, and this is what I will teach you in rhythm restoration. Creative reconceptualization, by visualizing the piece we want to see manifest from the trauma, And 2, a multi-perspective advantage. What is that? Multi-perspective advantage is what makes us unique as human beings. No other animal can look at a problem from different perspectives. With PTSD, when all we see is our pain and all we have are blinders on our eyes, we can't see the goodness that was working in the midst of that. We can look at that from a spiritual perspective as well. And when we're able to rewire our brains with creative reconceptualization and multiple perspective advantage, we pull and extract the poison from the trauma. And in doing so, we change the physical substrates of the memory, all the way down to the proteins, all the way down to the DNA. You file that back, not into the fear center of your brain any longer. You file it back into the hippocampus, which is the regular long-term memory. So what I want to show you really quick in a snapshot is the power of rhythm restoration. Okay? The first thing we use is rhythm. Bilateral stimulation. 1. The first thing we ever heard when we were in our mother's womb was what? Her heartbeat. We were developed to a rhythm. Rhythm helps regulate the autonomic nervous system. It helps to calm you and to soothe you. When I walk into my clinic and I see all the people in the waiting room in olive drab green, all their legs are popping up and down because they're trying to regulate themselves, right? The second part is bilateral stimulation. You'll notice when you go on a walk, run, or jog, your brain just goes a million miles an hour. It's simply, if I raise my right hand, guess what? The left hemisphere is working. If I raise my left hand, guess what? The right hemisphere is working. So when we alternate back and forth with bilateral stimulation, we're using the whole entire brain to process. We do that subconsciously in our sleep, during REM sleep, rapid eye movement. It's fantastic. It helps the brain to digest. Our eyes are moving back and forth in our head, right? But the problem is, we're not conscious. So when you bring that power to the conscious awareness, it can do so much. And now we already know the power of visualization, and I have discussed that. So understand this, that the brain has a difficult time determining between a real experience and an imagined one. So we use that to our benefit. So how do I use this with my soldiers? So I have them close their eyes and they're alternating, back and forth tapping, or they can use their legs, and they visualize what I give them. So one of the things that comes from my book, Peace After Combat, Healing the Spiritual and Psychological Wounds of War, is an excerpt entitled If They Could Speak. So I have them visualize the person that they lost in heaven, in Valhalla, wherever it may be, in their paradise, in their perfect self. And the person that they lost, I say, what would they say to you? What would they want you to know? And when they visualize them spiritually sound, made whole and full again, it brings that sense of wholeness back to the brain, and that sense of wholeness brings peace and harmony. You know, If They Could Speak basically states that you shouldn't be beating yourself up. I don't want you to contemplate suicide anymore. Appreciate the life that I gave you and live yours to the fullest. I don't want you to remember my last moments in life broken and breathless. I want you to visualize the times where I made you laugh so hard you pissed your pants. Okay? So with that being said, I'm wondering if I can re-engage you one more time in that exercise. Okay, if you feel comfortable, close your eyes. If you want to tap back and forth, that's good too. I want you to visualize that mentor coming into your office, sitting down. And all that comes next is a whole bunch of excitement and a whole bunch of goodness. For the next 10 seconds, just finish off that story in your mind's eye. Deep breath in, let it go, come back to the moment. Why did I do that? Because your mind is so important. I know, including me, we all have a lot of anxiety. And sometimes, a lot of time, we think about worst case scenario. We think about, oh, I'm going to come on the stage, I'm going to trip and fall on my 4-inch heels. I'm used to wearing combat boots. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen next, right? So we imagine worst case scenario. Now, is that healthy if every single one of our thoughts controls every single cell in our body? Absolutely not. Now, there is a phenomenon, we reap what we sow, for as a woman thinks, so is she. It states that in Proverbs, for as a man thinks, so is he. Right? So we have to think good thoughts. We have to align our thoughts with peace, harmony, and wholeness. So today I ask you the question, what is the visual in your brain? What is the visual in your brain? Because it is your brain's responsibility to turn that visual into complementary chemistry that impacts your whole being, spiritually, psychologically, and physically. Thank you.